Hey, hello everyone, and welcome back to the Omer Q Show. As always, I am your host, Omer Qureshi, and we've got a wonderful show planned for you today. Activist and organizer Alex Kack, who many of you may know as the green shirt guy, is going to be joining the show, and we'll be discussing, amongst many things, the most important issues facing working class people in Arizona. We'll also be filling us in on what he's been up to and the importance of activism in our society. So it's going to be good to check in with him. We're also going to be checking in on a huge development internationally in the Brazilian elections, as President of Brazil, Jair Balsonaro, just picked up a key international endorsement, and he's also now echoing election claims that have many Americans saying deja vu. So we'll talk about that, all that, much more coming up here on the Omer Q Show. But before we get started on any of that, please be sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you get notified whenever a new video is released if you're watching on YouTube. And if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, please be sure to leave us a 5-star review. Before we get to any of the things I just talked about, though, I just wanted to do some housekeeping very quickly. So, with all of the talk about Congress and these reconciliation bills and the infrastructure bills, and, Alex Baldwin has been in the news as well, Dave Chappelle and Netflix and what's been going on there, a lot of those things have been taking up a lot of airspace and news time on TV. And one of the biggest, or arguably one of the biggest stories in America, dare I say the world, is being ignored. And it's a story about corruption. It's a story about climate negligence. And it's a story that involves an activist becoming what many are saying is essentially a political prisoner. So just some background about this. For those who don't know, Steven Donzinger was an environmental lawyer, an environmental activist who was at the center of attention for decades, at least for Chevron, because he took up a case on behalf of citizens in Ecuador who claimed that Chevron's negligence in Ecuador led to deforestation and led to what resulted in several other climate emergencies. And after a decades-long legal battle, Chevron actually lost the legal battle, and Donzinger was able to convince the courts on behalf of the citizens of Ecuador an unprecedented $9.5 billion ruling in favor of Donzinger's clients. And Chevron was forced to pay out, and since then, they have been relentless in their pursuit to take Donzinger down, discredit him, and essentially ruin his life. And this is all part of honestly a system that has known to do this in the past. If you look at past political prisoners, whether you look back at even people like Gandhi, if you look back at people like Nelson Mandela, it is usually the systems that are in power that take these people down and try to silence them. And one of the mechanisms they have silencing them is BS claims, as far as BS legal claims. And one of the things that was used in this case, after a few years, Chevron began to sue him, and then Donzinger was held in contempt of court. What many are saying, a bogus contempt of court charge from a judge that was favorable to Chevron, led to Donzinger having to serve a 787-day house arrest sentence, and it was elongated because of the legal process. They called him a flight risk, and now after over 2 years and house arrest, not being able to leave his house, Steven Donzinger is now forced to actually go to prison on a contempt of court charge. So, a lot of people are asking, well, contempt of court, that doesn't usually lead to someone needing to go to prison. I know. And it was weird because the judge actually said this, and I quote, only the proverbial 2x4 between the eyes will instill in him any respect for the law. It was also said that Donzinger was a flight risk. And, well, this week, the flight risk with no respect for the law drove himself to prison to serve a 6-month prison sentence on top of what he already served, 2 years under house arrest. Donzinger's imprisonment is just another example of rampant and honestly transparent corruption and institutional corruption. It also serves as an example of how far the mainstream media is going to go to ignore cases like this. And a lot of times, we don't like to talk about it, but a lot of times, sometimes the media can be at fault and they can help or hurt cases like this. And it's what they do, especially during these times, that are important. And by not covering this case at all, it's almost as if they've picked a side, because this is a huge injustice that, if gone unpunished, if left unaccounted for, this can happen to anyone trying to instill any sort of climate justice or justice, period, in our society and in our world. What Steven Donzinger did was not a bad thing. Going and representing poor people, going and representing people who were affected by climate change, who were affected by negligence from a billion-dollar corporation, that is not a bad thing. And for Chevron, for the institutions of the court to take him down on a contempt of court charge, and on top of 2 years of his life being taken away under house arrest, another 6 months in prison, something about that doesn't sit right with me, and it shouldn't sit right with anyone. Now, a lot of people and activists who are on Donzinger's side, they are actually looking at the judge in this case, whose name is Loretta Prescott, I should say. And Loretta Prescott is a judge who basically has a lot of ties to corporate power. She's got a lot of corporate influence and historically has a lot of conflicts with cases that she's involved in. And this is just a short list of some of the conflicts and controversies that have come up in her era. So here's the thing. Prescott holds a seat on the advisory board for the New York chapter of the Federalist Society, which is a right-wing judicial lobby and a Chevron donor. On top of that, and it's a long list, I said, but on top of that, back in 1995, 3 years after she had been approved for the court, Prescott presided over a copyright case involving Twin Cities, a West publishing company, despite her husband's connection to the firm. Prescott's husband, by the way, is nearly 40-year veteran of a law firm that has corporate clients that I'm going to mention now. So one of those cases involving her husband's law firm, in 2000, she ruled in favor of Coca-Cola in a lawsuit brought by Pepsi, challenging its monopolistic practice of loyalty contracts with food service distributors. And later in 2010, her husband's law firm actually helped represent Coke in several mergers. In 1993, she made a dubious ruling saying that credit rating agencies have the same constitutional protections as newspapers, and which they don't, and they shouldn't, and that is a dubious claim. Whoever said that was probably right. And in 2018, she ruled that the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, which is one of the biggest agencies that actually help the consumers and help regular working class people, should be dismissed and eliminated. So, again, someone who has hardcore beliefs in what she believes. She has hardcore beliefs in keeping the systematic and corporate power alive. She is obviously very friendly to corporate interests, and the fact that she is connected to Chevron donors would make you think that perhaps she should not be part of this type of lawsuit, and she should not be presiding over this type of legal process. However, that's just the way it is. And there's a lot of questions that come out of this. One of the main questions is, what does this say about the system? And the only thing that comes to my mind is that we unfortunately have a system that cares more about Chevron's ego than it does the plight of victims of climate negligence. Because the entire reason this is happening to Donzinger is because he represented those people, those victims in Ecuador. It's the only reason this is happening. And Chevron had to pay that money out. They'll never get that money back. But what they can do is destroy a man's reputation, destroy a man's life, take time away from his kids and that relationship. And they've done exactly that. Steven Donzinger got disbarred over this bogus contempt of court charge. And it is the silence that we've heard or not heard, I guess, the silence and the lack of awareness of this topic that has led to these injustices to continue. And for my money, I think that not only is this a story worth reporting on because it has all of these connections to corporate power, it has all of these connections to, right and wrong, basic right and wrong, and it's very transparent what's going on here. But it's also something that I think if any common sense person heard about, they would 100% know what was going on, and they would 100% back Donzinger. Which, and again, if news media's if their main priority is to provide news and provide human-based news to people, this would be the biggest story in the country right now, because our judicial system just puts someone away for nothing, essentially nothing, other than standing up to corporate power. And this is the same system that imprisons minorities at a higher rate than white people. It's the same system that has been known for rampant corruption, that has been known for imprisoning people for very long sentences and then dubious sentences. It is a system that needs to be changed. And it's a system that needs to be called out. And while people like me and people like you probably can call it out as much as we want, we need some sort of real power, real awareness being made of this. And unfortunately, mainstream media, Fox, CNN, they all refuse to talk about it. And you could point to many things. You could point to a lot of companies' own connections with corporate power. You could point to the fact that it's a story that might not get as many clicks, or at least in the minds of many people might not get as many clicks. You could point to the idea that, maybe they don't see what's going on here, and which I highly doubt. And I think anyone who knows anything about this situation highly doubts. So one thing we really need to be honest about is accountability. And what has happened to Steven Donzinger is an example of an injustice that is being held unaccounted for, and it has happened way too many times. It has happened way too many times in our history. It has happened way too many times. Currently, it's happening. It is happening. It's beyond just one person, by the way. This is completely beyond Steven Donzinger. This you can point to anything, whether it's, like I just mentioned, whether it's disproportionate responses from the judicial system to minorities and their crimes comparatively to Caucasian people. This happens every day. And one thing that we need to be consistent about is challenging these institutional powers. Be ruthless with institutions, but be compassionate with people. That is what we need to remember when we're facing these types of challenges and these issues. And so that's just all I have to say about that. A lot of people might be wondering, how can we help? How can we create awareness about this? You can actually sign a petition that will move to help free Steven Donzinger or create awareness for this entire situation. You can go to sign.moveon.org/petitions/free-Steven-Donzinger. If you can't remember that, it's okay. The link for that petition is in this description. So please go check this out. It is crucial that we call this out, and it's crucial that we stop this type of retaliation from happening again, because what this is it is trying to scare people not to challenge people like Chevron who commit climate injustices, not to challenge institutional powers. That is the goal of trying to imprison someone. So please check out that petition, check out the case, learn more about it. And, we stand with Steven Donzinger. Before we move on to our next topic, though, I just want to play a clip of what he said as he left prison. Or as he left for prison. So let's just take a listen to what he had to say there.
Hey everybody, this is my last statement before I go into prison in just a few hours. I have to be in prison by 5 p.m. today for a 6-month sentence. It's unclear if I'll serve the entire 6 months, but I am reporting to custody today. First, I want to thank everyone for their support. This isn't a sad day for me. We are going to get through this. And the fact that they are forcing me into prison is a sign of our effectiveness. The good news is after 813 days of house arrest, my house arrest will be over, and we'll begin a new countdown toward my release to full freedom at the end of my sentence. And that is exciting for me. It's somewhat of a silver lining. Tonight will be the first night I will not be wearing my ankle bracelet, shackled to my leg like I've done for well over 2 years now. I also want to say that there was a huge rally today in Washington in support of my freedom, in support of efforts to hold the fossil fuel industry accountable, and we're growing. And the more they seem to attack us, the stronger we seem to get. I know I might feel a little subdued right now. I'm not looking forward to going into prison, but I'm prepared to deal with it, and I ask everyone to send letters. For those who know me, please come visit. You can contact my wife, Laura Miller, to get on the visitors list. And I look forward to seeing everyone over the next few weeks and months while in prison to the extent possible. I will be incommunicado for a few days, maybe longer. It's very hard to communicate from prison. We'll not have a computer or phone, but there are ways to get the word out through visitors and through a certain email system and some phone calls. So I look forward to being in touch, and just stay strong and stay with me, and we will get through this and we'll come out the stronger for it. Thank you so much.
Good there to hear from him that he's at least in good spirits. And again, if you can, please sign that petition. The link for that is in the description below. Help him out there. Like he said, send him letters. A lot of times, those letters or things like small things that take us 2 seconds to do, like petitions or anything like that. Just kind words can go a long way to help people, especially in times of crisis and things like that. So please do that. And not just this one. Go check out other activists and other means of helping anyone who might be going through similar things. Anyway, so that was Steven Donzinger. Let's move on and talk about some international news that has a lot of people saying deja vu, like I said earlier. It involves Brazilian President Jair Balsonaro. And for those of you who might not be as familiar with Jair Bolsonaro, he has been the president of Brazil since 2019. He won the 2018 elections. He preceded, actually, a president who was actually charged for corruption charges, and he promised to come in and change things. Currently, he's being investigated for possibly letting citizens die during the COVID pandemic, and I'm going to list some things here that he has done or said, and let me know if any of these sound familiar to you. Downplaying the COVID-19 pandemic, leading to large spikes in cases and hundreds of thousands of deaths. Discrediting science of climate change and pulling out of climate deals. Known for far-right racist policies on immigration and rhetoric to go along with that. Having a fervent base of supporters, which represents anywhere between 30 and 40% of the country, who stick with him despite these controversies. And also, currently, he is stating that the only way he won't win the election is if it is stolen. And he also, again, you guys can take that where you may and then think about that. It might remind you of somebody. But he also this week picked up a key endorsement from somebody, and that key endorsement was from President Trump, former President Trump, I should say. The endorsement comes just about a year out from the Brazilian election. He is set to run for re-election, and his main challenger is actually going to be Lula da Silva, who was president in Brazil actually right before Bolsonaro. And it's going to be kind of an experiment, an international experiment of left-wing populism versus this right-wing, almost fascism of Bolsonaro. And it is something that I've kept a close eye on because of the international implications it has. As we've seen, former President Trump, he's already endorsed Bolsonaro, and we'll get into why in just a second. But the whole I guess message of this election is going to be that axis, and whether that axis that went from left wing populism, because Lula was once president, to right wing to Bolsonaro's right wing, will it swing back? Will that pendulum kind of swing back? And you just have to look at kind of what's happened over the past few years to get an idea of where Bolsonaro currently stands. Currently, he's going up against Lula, and while Lula focused a lot of his messaging and a lot of his time in office implementing policies that served as a war on poverty, Bolsonaro seems to be fighting a war on the poor. He's had deals with Brazil's wealthiest people, the millionaires and the elite class of Brazil, cutting them deals, cutting funding for the Bolsa, which is a popular set of social welfare programs that seek to ease the effects of poverty on the Brazilian people. He's known for race baiting and blaming immigrants, many of whom live in poverty, for Brazil's economic problems. And a lot of people are asking now, internationally speaking, what's going to happen? What does Trump's endorsement mean? And why does it even matter? Let me start with the last two of those first. So the reason that this endorsement matters is because in a lot of ways, it is an international kind of experiment, like I talked about before. Donald Trump has stake in this battle, as he is rumored to be mulling a 2024 presidential run. Bolsonaro's victory would not only be a huge victory for the right wing, it would not only be a huge victory for people like Trump, but it would be a victory for a far-right movements all throughout the world, for leaders like Viktor Orban, for leaders like Lukashenko, for parties throughout the world like the AfD in Germany, which is just coming off of a big defeat. Bolsonaro's loss, however, would be a repudiation of ideas that Trump himself has peddled for years. So that's why this matters. It is almost as if Trump is digging his heels in and getting ready to fight a figurative battle on the international front for the right wing. And that is why his teaming up, his partnership almost with someone like Bolsonaro is important, because it galvanizes Brazil's right wing that might have, some sort of connection, some sort of appeal with Trump for Bolsonaro, and galvanizes them even more. And it makes the entire right-wing movement, this almost fascist movement worldwide, stronger. That is the whole point of this endorsement for Trump. He's trying to become this international leader. If he can't become president, he's trying to become the international face of the right wing. And, as far as what this spells for the Brazilian elections, I honestly think that outside of Bolsonaro's right-wing base, this is not going to make a huge impact. I think at the end of the day, this is going to be an election in Brazil in 2022. This is going to be an election based on policies, based on the economic platforms by both candidates. And if you look at Lula and what he's running on, which is expanding things like the Bolsa, refunding things like the Bolsa, refunding programs that he implemented back in 2010 when he was president. If you look at what his platform is and the human-based campaign he's running, I do think that Brazil and Brazilians are going to look at that, especially working class and poor Brazilians are going to look at Lula's rise and again, Lula is someone who many also say was, in a sense, a political prisoner, as he had some charges that were also very dubious on him. He spent time in prison. He was actually acquitted. He was released, and he is eligible to run. So take that as how you may. Some people say they're not trumped up charges, but regardless, I think Lula's platform serves to the benefit of the poor in Brazil way more than Bolsonaro's does. But we will see. And again, this is almost like going to be a test tube case for the international community, and it could have ramifications for what kind of rhetoric people in general are more appealing to these days. And I think that, it's not going to have any direct ramifications on the 2024 presidential elections. However, it is going to captivate a lot of people, as far in the political classes, whether you're left, right, or center. This is going to be an election you're going to be paying attention to. So we will keep a close eye on this and much, much more. Again, so we are going to be right back with the Omer Q show with Alex Kack, and we're going to be talking to him about a lot of different stuff. So stay tuned to the Omer Q show. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the Omer Q show. Joining me at this time is activist, organizer, podcaster, part-time comedian, full-time green shirt guy, Alex Kack. Alex, how you doing, my man?
I'm living the dream, man. I'm living the dream. It's 2 days before Halloween. It's like the second best time of the year. Things are going well.
Oh yeah, what's the first best time of the year?
December, obviously.
Oh, obviously, yes. We love the holidays.
Oh yeah. I love a theme.
Yeah, absolutely, man. So Alex, before we get into it, I wanted to keep things a little fresh before we started, so we didn't talk too much, beforehand. But I remember, you and I, we were talking. We spent some time at Amnesty International together in DC, and I just wanted to have you talk maybe about your experience in the swamp. What did you think about DC? What did you think about the people and just overall?
I mean, look, I love DC. I refuse to call it the swamp. First off, it's it's the Mid-Atlantic, so it's geographically kind of swampy. But I love the district. I do. Don't get me wrong. There are stereotypes about the district that hold true. There are tons of white people who've moved there from whatever suburb to go to grad school or to do undergrad at I don't know, American or George Washington. They're there working on the Hill. And there is just a very often kind of yuppie, uptight vibe to some people. And it is also, there's a lot of transitory people. I mean, I was only there for a few years, so I shouldn't really criticize about that. But that's not all of it. I mean, that's a stereotype that there's some truth to, but there's lots of great people there. I mean, I met tons of people who are lifetime friends of mine. I assume, barring any, I guess you never really know, but
hopefully,
yeah. I mean, I keep in touch with them. I still see them when I go back. There's so much to do in DC and in the district that, it's completely unique to that area. And there is, I think, there's a certain maybe reverence or awe I think you get being around some of those buildings, around some of that history. I mean, even if you're not the most kind of patriotic person or the most red, white, and blue, yay USA type, there is just, I think, a universal feeling that you tend to catch when you're out there. And when you're around at the halls of power, people that are showing up there to try to persuade it or change it. I mean, yeah, there's a lot of lobbyists coming in and out of town, but there's also a million different groups there on any given day from all over the country, a million different people trying to make their voices heard, trying to do something positive or negative or whatever. And I mean, you wind up kind of having experiences that you're really not going to have anywhere else. including half smokes for the record, which is like a thing that I will always miss. I will always miss Ben's Chili Bowl. It's just not ever going to be an option not to.
Big shout out to Ben's Chili Bowl. Almost every Sunday, it became a ritual of mine to go there. But yeah, no, I mean, I actually dug what you were saying there earlier about like, you know, the sense of patriotism you get like from just being around some of those buildings because and I think like especially on the left, you know, patriotism is kind of seen as like I guess like a cliche or you know, it's like, oh, it's like patriotism's like largely I guess almost been like I don't want to say hijacked by the right, but like apparently you can't be a leftist and a patriot at the same time and people have like different views of what patriotism is, but like, you know, some people think it's like, oh, just waving the flag around, but like others genuinely think and I kind of subscribe to this like it's you know, patriotism can mean multiple things, but what it means to me is like you know, really wanting better for your country, wanting better for the people who live there, and you know, sometimes that means criticizing the structures, the power it be, criticizing the way things are, so it can be better. And you know, again, like I also got that same feeling. That's why I wanted to bring it up. Like whenever you like just walking around the monument sometimes, like aimlessly, like I did for hours on end sometimes it's weird how like that history almost like you actually feel it walking around there and you know I know a lot of people who also love to shit on the swamp. Am one of those people who from time to time it's also because I lived there for a long time so you know I guess I'm jaded in a way but you know but you're right there I'm glad you brought up like you know that there is like that kind of like feeling about DC, you know, that's different.
Yeah, I mean, there's just something that I think I think it's hard to be there and not feel it. And look, some of those feelings can be incredibly negative. There's a lot of negative stuff going on there on any given day.
Mm-hmm.
I think you know on the concept of like kind of the current political climate though and the nature of patriotism. I mean, there is kind of a it seems like there's kind of a growing, like almost weird kind of left nationalism that like shows up from time to time online. That's a very
you talking about the old Jimmy Dore nationalism that rears his face up from now and again.
I mean, there's like for sure a strain of it to an extent there, but yeah, I mean, yeah, just in different places. I don't think it's a unified movement anyway. I do think there's a kind of just a growing feeling of it some places, but it's very minor. And I don't ever expect it to be a major force, which I think is good because that's really not, I think, a sense of patriotism
Right.
in general. I think there's a hard line between nationalism and concepts of patriotism. And a lot of them, I think, have to start with, you know, I mean, what do you really see the institutions of a nation as, and how do you interact with them? But I think it also means that, you know, is this something that you're blindly following in a dogmatic way versus something that you understand isn't static and needs work and needs critique consistently. I think one of those tendencies is patriotic and the other is an incredibly toxic form of nationalism. It's, you know, but in a broader way, I mean, just to address your point, it's never been in vogue on the left to be, you know, patriotic in air quotes. I mean, not really on the left. I mean, sure, if you're kind of like a center left liberal and you're been in whatever the mainstream of American politics were, then that's like kind of fine. And there's certainly been, I think, parts of the labor movement that have been very patriotic for a long time.
Absolutely.
But and I think when you look at broader kind of concepts of like leftist thought and like just kind of a leftist tradition outside of that labor movement, like of course it's not patriotic. But I think part of that also, and if there's going to be any shift in that, it gets to an uncomfortable conversation because it's really hard to feel patriotic if you view these institutions or this nation as kind of a monolithic evil empire that people are in general shut out of. And I mean, if that's the case, then you shouldn't feel patriotic about it, right? I mean, you should want to tear it down. It's also, I think, the same if you don't feel any kind of general consensus or general feeling of community with the broader nation. If you're in a very tribal kind of mentality, that you've kind of identified your ideological brethren or your fandom pop culture groups that you stick to, and you just want nothing to do with anyone else that lives here. You feel no commonality with them. It's very hard, I think, in that sense as well, to feel any sense of patriotism. But if I think you identify yourself in a broader sense as someone who shares some type of kind of common cultural identity from having lived in this nation, and understands that despite how incredibly different this place is just from city to city within the same state, much less from state to state, that there's a lot of common threads that we all share. But I think also realizing that this evil empire, I mean, these institutions, undoubtedly done a lot of evil in history. I would argue they've done some good too, but I do believe that to some degree there's an embodiment of the people of the nation in that. And look, I mean, some of that I think is very uncomfortable, because I think that it's really easy to critique powerful figures and powerful organizations and say you've done bad. I think it's much harder though to hold up that mirror and say that, you are running this nation that, like I vote in the elections for, and I participate in, and I am a part of, and I benefit from. And like, even if I didn't support your rise to power, like I'm inherently a part of that evil. That's, I think, the difficult part about being in any type of collective or any type of state body and being a part of it and choosing to be a part of it.
You kind of have to take the good with the bad, like in a sense.
Yeah, I mean, you have to take responsibility for both, I think, really.
Absolutely,
and I think that you also have to understand that responsibility is shared amongst everyone in that group. So I think there's a really kind of horrible and awful thing that you have to stop and look at and say, the bad that this nation that I'm a part of has done, like it's a bad that we have done, even if I used my voice and I fought out against it, and I did not vote for these people, or et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There's some type of benefit that comes from that. And I think it's can be an incredibly difficult thing to really rectify, like justify, and for a lot of people, not justify, but certainly just to rectify with their own sense of their personal identity. It gets difficult, and it gets very difficult. I think it's much easier to just push back and say, these people are bad. It's much harder, I think, to own a piece of that bad and get up and say, well, we need to do better. It was a very long-winded response to an offhanded comment you made right at the top.
Well, I thought it was great and very insightful, honestly, because you hit at a lot of things there. And like, one of the things I'm thinking about, like even now, and I do think about often, is one of the biggest criticisms of like the left, the progressives, whatever some people call it different things. But one of the biggest criticisms is that, progressives are too negative, or they focus on a lot of those bad aspects that you mentioned there. And, we don't focus enough on the good things. And I think, so here's the thing. I think to an extent, yeah, they have a point, because yeah, do we tend to, emphasize a lot of critiques? Absolutely, because there's enough to criticize, and there's enough criticism to go around. But a part of me does kind of, I wouldn't say wish, but part of me does kind of seek a little bit of, when I'm talking to someone who might have like similar views to mine, or even, who knows, far left, far right, whatever, it is maybe like that sense of just, for better or worse, we're kind of in the same situation. And, kind of just like you said, taking the good with the bad, and maybe just appreciating some of the good aspects. And I think the issue is, and the reason, that progressives, we can't fawn on it for too long, is because the second we do, is like you have moderate centrists beginning to be like, oh great, look, the progressives even love the way things are. And it's like, no, that's not what we were saying. We're saying like, hey, this is a good thing. but then we're kind of forced to just go back into the whole negative. And then that's like part of the whole like, media spin that, all progressives are just angry little Bernie bros typing on their laptops or whatever. But I mean, that was just a thought I had coming off of that. But
I mean, I think that's a really good point, though. And I think especially when you're talking about, kind of the progressive movement as an electoral force, or, kind of vague notions of social democracy or democratic socialism, people who identify with these things, who are trying to run for office or hold some type of power in America. I think the kind of narrative of electoral politics and of political culture in a democracy, it has ebbs and flows in sentiment. And some of those are kind of defined by pushes of populist anger, and then often kind of retractions and looking for, I think, comfort, and I think looking for semblances of stability. Normalcy is a word that gets thrown around a lot. I don't ever really think that's accurate. I think calm is what people are often looking for in those periods. Right. And I think also, for lack of any better term, a general sense of good feeling and cheer. Look, the left can do well. I think they've proven that in elections, in those populist moments. They can really, because I think the modern kind of, I hate using the term left, honestly, to describe a lot of these people, because I mean, even the ones who kind of self-identify as socialists, I mean, they're not really socialists. They're not really part of the broader left. I mean, they're like left liberals, which is fine. I think that's a really fine political ideology. I think, especially living in kind of a, air quote, bastion of liberalism, like if you want to get anything done, that's probably as far left as at least at this moment is electorally viable. But I think when those campaigns get generated kind of based just on critique and not in celebration, those movements that coalesce can too often flame out super quickly. I think that, we came out of one of those moments of real populist anger. We're kind of coming out of it right now. It's being written, but I would hate to see all the gains that were made on those ideals kind of fall by the wayside if sentiment is changing the way it sometimes feels like it is already in the electorate. So I think that, we need candidates who can push for these policies, who want to either reform or dismantle systems that aren't working, and who want to strive for the betterment of people. But I think there needs to be some adjustment, like often, in what the kind of pitch of that looks like to people. Because when everyone's already angry and kind of terrified, it's really easy to kind of like just yell and say something's broken. Yeah. Once everyone starts either just burning out or calming down, though, like you've got to keep their support and their attention somehow. And
it's like how do you like really use that anger? How do you utilize it to bring about change, to bring about something better, like the something better that I mentioned earlier? Like I think that's like the question that's kind of been left. I mean, we have certain theories about how like it's possible to do that on a more national level. We've seen, like you said, we've seen some like instances locally where that's worked. I think in Buffalo, New York is like probably the most recent example of this. And Miss Walton up there, who hopefully, fingers crossed, going to be mayor up there. But
I think very likely.
Very likely. I was about to call her.
Certainly, but
yeah, I was about to call her mayor, and then I was like, oh well, still got an election like a week or two, but yeah.
I mean, there was a split moment where it felt like that level of presumption was going to be okay in that race,
right?
And then obviously,
yeah, and now there's like they're having like debates where the nominee who lost is in there. Oh, it's a mess up there, but
it's a mess.
but we love Sister Walton. But she is, a lot of what she did. I think she did a great job. She had an appearance on, like, I think it was Bad Faith podcast that I was listening to, and she talked about, like, really harnessing that anger in a more practical way, because there's a lot of outrage, and deservedly so, in this country. But and I just remember the way she was talking about it, about the problems we face, about everything that's going on, is, we can be angry. We can be as angry as we want, but we also have to have the willingness and the vision to actually bring about change in these ideas. And I think having that clear cut purpose and motive going into, like, elections like that and races like that are probably what we need more of, because, like you said, there's a lot of people who run, and there are a lot of fine people. Like, there were in 2020, 2018, there were so many great candidates who ran. Some of them won, a lot of them didn't, but they went out there and they tried. And I think one thing that I've learned from watching a lot and keeping up with these races is the ones that are, the ones who, like, focus less on, a lot of the outrage. And there's certain instances where that's, where that has helped people, but the ones who focus on, like, really galvanizing the community over, like, through a vision, like Cori Bush, I think, is an example of someone who did this very well. Like, she brought about, like, the anger from, like, her time as an organizer, and during Ferguson, and all that, and she was able to, one, capture, like, that anger, and actually, like, resonate with that sentiment, but also bring it past just, we're angry and we want change. Here's what we want. And here's how we're going to get there, and here's why you should care. Like, I just remember paying close attention to her race. That's, like, one of the big things that I took away, and like, I was honestly, like, I guess a learning experience for me, as just someone who watches and keeps up with these races. And I think you're totally right, though. Like, that purpose, that vision, it needs to be there, and it can't just be that outrage.
Yeah, and I think that's, I mean, look, like you said, there were so many candidates that ran up and down ballots in the last two cycles. Some of whom, I mean, were just in impossible situations. Some of whom were just kind of learning the ropes. And I think some of whom, the thing that was missing was kind of that sentiment thermometer almost. And I think when you do look at some of the folks who've been really successful, I think some of the folks who are becoming leaders, I think there's a moment where I think that, you can see people pivot sometimes from talking primarily about the problems to talking primarily about the solutions. And I think even the way that talking about the solutions can get framed, sometimes you'll notice the almost kind of rhetorical and emotional changes that people use. And I think that's really important, just for people that are trying to run on these policies. They've got to know, when is the time to let people know that you're as angry as they are, but, like, when is the time to let people know that, like things can be better, and things can be better specifically for them, and how that's going to happen. It just is kind of one of those things that I really hope that the movement can kind of continue, I think, especially in an electoral sense, to navigate that effectively and well, and that we get more leaders and more people kind of rising up who are good at navigating that. Because I think that if it becomes, and this is, I think, some of the image issues that the left and kind of the progressive side of party politics has had in the past, is that it becomes image issues. And if it becomes this idea that, like, that's just a bunch of old hippies yelling on the street corner about everything that's wrong, and saying things that could never happen, then, like, we start losing elections again.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's a lot to unpack when you're talking about elections. We got to revisit that sometime, because that's actually, like, that's an amazing conversation. I know we rambled a bit, so sorry to the audience. But speaking of rambling, you used to have a podcast where you did just that. It was called Sorry for Rambling. And the reason I bring that up is twofold. One, I kind of wanted you to like talk about your experience there, and two, I actually want to let you know like. So like I remember like one day like scrolling through like Twitter and I saw like you had posted an episode and I was like, "Oh, cool." And this was like during middle of the pandemic, like I had nothing going on, so I was just like listening to podcasts nonstop. And like after listening to it, I was like, "Oh, this is cool. Just talking about politics, whatever's going on in the world, like and we have a lot of time on our hands." So like that's like part of the reason I actually like started, this podcast. So
Really?
yeah, no, like no shit. Like like dead ass. Like but yeah, no. So I mean, one that's why. So thank you. No, but other than that, you did a lot of like really cool stuff though. Like I almost want to say out there, but like it was honestly just really cool stuff. Like you interviewed some of the ones I remembered. You interviewed Jen Perlman, who was running for Congress. You had one with this guy Mark Charles, who was running for some third party. Who I thought that interview was like really cool. Howie Hawkins and all these third party presidential candidates, and I thought that was just like a really cool thing to do. And like whether or not you agreed with them, it was like amazing conversation. So, why don't you just tell me a little bit about that experience and what really made you want to do those?
I mean, yeah. Well, I mean, first off, I guess I had no idea you started doing your show because of my show. I don't think it meant much of anyone even listened or watched that thing. I keep saying I'm gonna do like another run or like another season or whatever, but so I guess keep an eye out for that. But I mean, it's really cool to hear that. I mean, you liked it and enough that it made you want to do this. So I'm kind of a little taken aback. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
Let's start there. The experience was great though, because the experience really just I got to meet so many people in a very real way. I mean, like I just got to meet people. Um, After the moment of virality happened and the green shirt guy video happened, I did have like all these people following me on Twitter and whatnot. And yeah, I don't know. I mean, we were kind of heading into the pandemic. I didn't know that at the time, but the pandemic definitely caused me to ramp up the output of episodes. But it was an excuse more than anything. It was an excuse to just like talk to these people when I like wouldn't necessarily have had like that level of reason to talk to them otherwise. And yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's been really great if for no other reason than like I am still friends with a bunch of people like from doing those podcasts with them. I still keep in touch with a lot of people that I had on there, people that like were people I like that followed me on Twitter and I followed back and I like found interesting for whatever reason, but like we would not have spoken otherwise. Like now we like sometimes have conversations and like exchange text messages and keep in touch. It's a really like unique and cool experience.
Yeah, dude. No doubt. And I think that's like the cool thing about podcasting. Like so other than this, I have like another podcast I do, which is like sports related. And and that's grown like more than this has, but but that doesn't really matter to me. But what I've noticed about like, podcasting, especially during the pandemic, it's almost like whenever you interview someone or you have like a collab on your show or what have you, you get this sense of it's built this sense of community like amongst like, podcasters, content creators, whatever you may be. And it's weird how close of a connection you can have to sometimes people you've never met in real life. Like that's the big thing. And then when you do meet in real life, it's like really cool because you're finally getting to meet this person that was been like a Zoom call for like the past year, but then but then it's also kind of awkward because you're like, well, I know a lot about you, but like this is like the first time we're meeting. It's weird. It's just a weird adjustment to make, but it's exciting in that way, and I just love. If we can take some good things away from the pandemic, because there was a lot of bad, but some of the good things that came out of it, I think, is we were forced to kind of like build these connections with people like who were farther away or people who we never met and find different ways to socialize and save our own psyche. But At least that's what it was for me. And like podcasting's like one of those things. I don't know if you might have had the similar experience. Like for me, it's something that almost like just kept me busy, and I like to say kept me sane, because I was like, I need something to do with my day, and I need people to socialize. And that's kind of the reason I started it, like as far as a sports one. And then this is doing what it's doing. And then now I've got like 14 podcasts, and all I do is talk all day, and it is what it is. But I don't know, like, did you ever have like those like similar experiences, like when you were like going through that, like with meeting people, or just like doing it just to uh stay sane, like I said?
I mean, both. Really, I would say yes to kind of both of those aspects. The pandemic it's. I mean, we're still in it, but we're coming out of it, right? The light is at the end of the tunnel. We are getting back out into the world slowly, cautiously. Some of us with no caution at all. And so it's like there's almost this moment where we haven't really had a chance to process it all, and yet, we're almost 2 years away from it. The beginning parts feel so far away, but it is interesting to, I think, stop and reflect on especially the ways that like human connection changed so drastically during that time period. And yeah, I think especially for people who were like creating content, or people who were started doing like digital events, or kind of anything in that ballpark, where suddenly you were talking to people from maybe all over the country or all over the world. And look, Zoom is a really poor substitute for spending time with someone, face to
You're
face.
telling me.
Sharing their air and their germs, but it was really wonderful, I think, in how it was able to bring some people together still. And yeah, it has created connections for, I think, all of us that are probably certainly changed and shaped the way that the experience of 2020 and the first half of 2021 like were probably for all of us. But I think we'll realize it has also changed our lives in other ways moving forward. It's a really strange thing. I mean, I met one of the most important people in my life on the internet in another state right before the pandemic began, really. I mean, like January of 2020. She might be my best friend in the whole world. I mean, certainly at this moment. I mean, we talk every day, but there's, I think, this big question that, like, I feel like both of us have had to ask. Like, would we have still developed the bond that we did if that pandemic wasn't happening? If, was it the extra time we had that allowed us to communicate in this way and to get to know each other from 300 plus miles, 400? I have actually no idea. I don't know anything about geography, but from opposite ends of the country, would we have developed it in the same way? That's a question I don't necessarily know an answer to. I mean, I know that it created and changed the way that we did interact, even at that distance. And for as horrible as it all was, I certainly wouldn't trade that relationship for anything.
And I think, like, just on that point, like, anytime we're like thinking about those like almost impossible questions, like, oh, what if I had done this, what would have happened after that? Like, we'll never know. The truth is, we will never know what would have happened if, the pandemic, like many people thought it was, like in December or whatever, it was just gonna be, it's gonna be like Ebola 2.0, and we're like the media just making a big hullabaloo about it. And then, like, I remember I was actually with Isaac. But this is a funny story. So the day before, like, everything shut down, me and Isaac we were somewhere in DuPont. Like, after work, I went there, and like I got an email, and it was like, oh, everything's remote or whatever. So, and like that was like, I think, like end of the second week of March. So, everything was like closed. Like we knew COVID was a thing, but it was like still like the reality didn't set in. I think is what it was. So me and Isaac are sitting there like, oh, this is gonna be like cool. Remote work. We'll just be, at Starbucks or whatever, hanging out and working or whatever. And then then like so we hung out that night, and then the next day everything shut down. Oh, my pen just went flying. Everything shut down, and I it's been over a year and a half later. I have not seen Isaac. By the way, Isaac, hello from both of us. If you're watching, you're definitely watching this because I told you it was happening. But it's like,
hey Isaac, good to see
yeah,
you.
yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, but it's just like so weird how like drastically that changed, and thankfully, I think a lot of people were at least over time able to adapt, even though it was difficult for I think all of us. But yeah, I think it's just it is like one of those like weird, I don't want to even say anomalies, just one of those weird life experiences that we're like gonna be either asked about, and we're honestly, I think, still not gonna know how to fully explain it like to our kids or grandkids.
No, I mean the severity of the historical moment we just went through, I think, is really still lost on a lot of us, and on probably on all of us in reality. I was actually thinking this earlier today, because I was coming back from the grocery store, and I was like bringing the bags in, and I like dropped my mask on the ground, and I was just kind of like looking at it. I was thinking about the fact that the other night my brother and I went to get pumpkins at the pumpkin stand, and we took photos with our pumpkins with our masks on at the pumpkin place. And I was thinking about, like, you looking back through photo albums with your kids and grandkids, and all of a sudden you hit this kind of chronological period where everyone's faces are covered and everyone's standing really far apart. And suddenly you've got to explain to a 5-year-old that, overnight, how different things were. And I mean, what the experiences are so different. And in so many ways, it's one thing to be so isolated from it, just to the isolation of living alone and the late nights of Netflix binging and not knowing, like,
Tiger King season 2 coming your way.
Past. But then there's the other side of it, which is that there were bodies stacked up in trucks all over the country and in pits in different places. And there's the severity of death. I think we've hit a number of people dead, both, nationally here in the US and globally.
Yeah.
That I think when you get these mass catastrophe events like this, it loses the personal tragedy, because no one can keep track of millions of stories, right? It's different than, some person in your community who, like, a child that goes missing, or someone that like dies while they're like, hiking or camping or something, and you hear about it on the news for like 3 days at a time, or some horrific grisly murder that happens in your neighborhood, and everyone on whatever that social network for neighbors is, that seems incredibly nosy to me, but that, that one where everyone's talking about the horrible thing that happened, that stopped happening real quick with COVID, with the pandemic. But you can't leave that context out when you're trying to explain it to future generations or explain it to other people. And yet, for those of us that weren't working on the front lines, or who didn't have someone that close to us that died, we were so far removed from it in reality. I don't know how anyone is going to have to really, really explain that in the gravity that it deserves.
Yeah, and I think like we all have our own experiences, and like that's the best we can do when trying to explain something like that. But yeah, it was a crazy time for sure. I guess like switching gears, because like I really don't have a transition for it. Like we just went from talking about pandemic, we're just gonna go right into something else. So you're from Arizona, which I've been to a few times. Very quirky state, quirky people, lovely people, but quirky. But I
both of those are accurate descriptors.
There we go. But I remember like when I was younger and I visited Tucson actually, because that's where like my aunt and uncle were at the time. like I just remember like the two things that stood out to me were like kind of like the vibe of the people, and also like lizards, which I saw like kind of like all over the place. Like, and I remember, and look, I'm from Pakistan, so like lizards like in your house are kind of like it's normal, like it's like normal. But like these were some bold lizards, my guy. Like in Pakistan, they're kind of scared of you. They'll like wander off. Like in Arizona, like those come up to you, right up to you, like dap you up. I'm like like so, but like it's an interesting. It's an interesting vibe overall, but I guess my question to you is about Arizona. It's like, what are kind of like, I guess, right now, the more pressing, issues facing just working class people there? Like, I know you don't have to pick one. There's definitely multiple answers, obviously, but like, what do you
Yeah,
think is
I
like
mean,
most pressing?
I don't know that you can rank it that way,
Right.
honestly.
Okay.
So we have a new legislative session that's going to
Mm-hmm.
start around the beginning of the year. It's going to be just a horrifying mix, I think, of everything. Republicans got perilously close, I think, to losing their majorities in the House and the Senate here, in the state House, and the state House and Senate, that is.
Mm-hmm.
They obviously lost two U.S. Senate seats fairly recently. And at the same time, a lot of the people that had been elected to these state legislative positions, I think from the Republican Party, were veering further and further off. For a decade now, we're veering further and further out of, kind of off into that far right, total false reality type of politics.
Mm.
And I think what you're seeing a lot of idea we're going to double down on the strictest, worst forms of social conservatism, and that will drive our voters out in midterm elections. We already have seen some really horrific abortion bills come through in Arizona. I think from what some of our more spirited and vocal Republican state senators and representatives have said on Twitter and Facebook, there's a bunch more coming, especially depending on what happens with these two cases, literally in the next 2 months of the Supreme Court. But I think we've also got serious voter rights issues that we've got to, really, really grapple with what that means. Because, I mean, we're talking about a party that is in its death throes and is primed and ready to just cheat their way, almost, to just kind of change the rules so that they can win, which is really what we're talking about. Those are hugely, massively pressing issues. I think that we're still in this pandemic. Our state, 2 different times, was considered basically the global epicenter for spread. I mean, our death rate, I think now has eclipsed New York State's, despite the fact that New York obviously has far more people than we do, and many of them are living in a more condensed space, and yet we still have really, really kind of different approaches from one corner of the state to another and how to deal with it. We have a really high vaccination rate down here in Tucson. We have a much lower one in the Phoenix metropolitan area, which has far more people in it. We do not have mask mandates. We've had a governor and that's actively going against them. So we're still in a powder keg moment of like things that could be really traumatizing to working people, to people who, look, if you have enough money, none of these things necessarily have a direct impact in your life. I think they will still indirectly impact you as they negatively impact the societal structures. But when you are lower middle class, when you're working class, when you are working poor, these are direct assaults on you. These are direct assaults on your, right to vote, to your right to life, to your literally your right to life and your ability to stay alive. I couldn't narrow one down, honestly, at this point in this state, because everything. Arizona has always kind of, I think, not always, but certainly for a couple decades, had some of the most extreme voices in the room pushing dangerous policies successfully, despite it being against the will of a majority of voters in the area.
Yeah, I mean, I guess going off of that, like, I mean, because I have to ask you now, like, how's it been dealing with some of those voices, like, especially like considering like the seemingly endless amount of audits and like recounts that are happening? Like, is that something you're just constantly aware of or reminded of?
I mean, yeah, you're constantly reminded of it. Again, I am lucky to live in Tucson, which is it's kind of a little Democratic bastion for a
Mm,
long time, and what has been perceived as a red state, and yet I don't ever really believe has been.
right.
I think looking at these elections, I think there are different through lines that people are missing. But in general, Tucson actually is a little bit more of a reliably Democratic place. So a lot of what I think that we think of with the kind of clown show of the audit, or like the clown show of like local officials, like in the past historically, like Joe Arpaio and stuff like that, like we can be a
Mm,
little bit insulated from down here. But yeah, it's something that's constantly happening in the background, and we are constantly dealing with these decisions and these policies. And look, I mean, that audit is a great example of something that just wasted taxpayer money,
thank you.
wasted lots of attention and time for no reason at all. There was never ever any credible evidence. There was no evidence, period. Let's forget credible of any impropriety or fraudulent issue. But what was able to happen there is that there were a lot of people who were able to back that thing and fundraise off of it. And I mean, if nothing else, it was a grift. It was a con. And the truth is, I wish someone could get and sit down with people who really, the voters who really believed in this thing, who really thought that their votes had been stolen,
Mm,
and just redirect that anger back at the people who are actually stealing their money, because
yeah.
that's what this audit was in so many ways.
And it's like so weird because I and again, like, I understand where a lot of feeling comes from, like, the desire to like hear these voices and then just want them to like, oh, shut up and go away and not engage. Like, I understand that sentiment, and but I've always been someone who, like, I mean, yes, are there instances where I won't engage with someone if they're being like blatantly racist or whatever? Yeah, I'm not gonna engage with that directly. But, I think like this is a good example of like Michael Brooks once said, and Michael Brooks is like a great late podcaster, all that stuff. He once said that you need to be ruthless with institutions, but be compassionate and kind with people. And I think sometimes we lose sight of that sentiment, of the fact that, like you said, we're all kind of in this together, and then that sense of community, and it gets lost because we disagree about sometimes very petty things or what have you, or or in some people's cases they're getting bad information. And I think like not engaging actually is doing not only like those people a disservice, but it's also doing like the entire community a disservice, because those people at the end of the day, whether you like it or not, they're here. And you can either help them like see the reality, or at least engage in that conversation and see that you're not, some like whatever the right wants to make everyone who doesn't believe the big lie, like they're not this big monster. Like, and I think that's like we treat people like these monsters, and instead of treating, like the grifters, like you said, the politicians who fundraise, the My Pillow guy who's just funneling money into meaningless bullshit, and the institutional powers that be, but and again, I get it's a tricky like subject for some people, but I think we need to do we're disengaging, and I don't like the direction that leads into, because then it just leads into, oh, okay, so the battle lines are being drawn. I mean, that's probably like maybe a little hyperbole, but you get what I'm saying.
Well, I mean, I think that some of these things do have to be predicated by like hyperbolic thought experiments sometimes,
Mm.
and I think that's a very real one.
Yeah.
If you're going to completely try to ignore these people and or let the kind of cancerous ideas metastasize further, like, yeah, battle lines are a little short of ultimately like what I think people don't realize they're necessarily endorsing when they're talking about not attempting persuasion, not attempting kind of, you know, deprogramming, honestly, for some people. I think the other side of it, though, is there's a difficult line to thread here, because I think that, unfortunately, the way these conversations tend to be framed as either or types of approaches, right? Like, and there needs to be some unified thing on the movement, and that's just not, especially as they get arbited online, like, and that's just not like at all how any of this actually works. Look, engaging with those people, either civilly or less civilly, is just simply not a tactic for a lot of people. It is for other people. Those are personal decisions based on your own kind of comfort with risk and your own risk assessment of different interactions. Not every tactic needs to be endorsed by every single person who believes in some type of idea or policy effort or change or anything. That's just is absolutely ridiculous on its face. I think if you say it like that, you can see how ridiculous it is. But I do think that it becomes too often this type of, what is the group think hive mind of the internet, like, litigate is the appropriate way to engage in activism. And people like kind of try to fall in to like a certain mode or mold that they are like being told is like the right way to do things. And it's far more personal than that. I think also it's something that you need to decide for yourself what level of engagement you're willing to do, but it's also something that like you need to also really ask yourself those questions first, so that you can find like-minded individuals to work with and to work in the ways that you want to make change.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, we need to engage. We need to have dialogue with the worst people, and you know, the ones that are the most far gone often are the ones who like need to be engaged with the most. But it's not something that like everyone needs to go do or everyone should go do.
Yeah.
It's,
and in some cases, I think a lot of people like shouldn't. And I was kind of just speaking more so as like it just seems like the overarching strategy from like everyone who's not one of those people is just to like shut them out. And like that's the one thing I like. Again, not everyone has to talk to him, but I think like if you feel inclined, you definitely should at least attempt to, because you never know what difference you can make. Like I remember I was up in Pennsylvania before the 2020 election, and I was talking to this guy, voted for Trump. He was very far right, and then like I just started talking to him about ideas. I started talking to him about different like the candidates, and like the one thing I brought up was like Andrew Yang, and he was like a Yang fan because like there was a crossover there, and I started talking about how Biden was implementing some of Yang's thoughts and stuff like that, and the guy didn't like, and he was like very I guess aggressive or what have you when I initially started talking to him, but then as we like kind of built, I guess, a connection, it's like finding that one thing to bridge you guys, and sometimes it's politics, some other times it's football, whatever. But once you find like that one common thread, it becomes a lot easier to talk to someone and really like shift through all the BS that's there, because there's a lot of it. And I just think like I think there's been possibly too much of a call to disengage, which is just something like I don't want to see us fully disengaged, because I feel like what that ends up doing Like we've seen what happening on social media. Like when you kick people off social media because of shit takes, like granted, they're shit takes, but when you do that, then where are they gonna go? They're gonna go Parlor or what's the name of Trump's like the Truth app? I don't care, whatever.
Some crazy shit like that.
I'm
Can I say shit on here?
you
Have
can
I
say
said
whatever
shit
you want.
already?
Yeah, I've said
Probably.
it. It's fine.
I,
Yeah,
yeah. I mean, I couldn't agree with you more, first off. And I think that the part of the issue is that there's again, things often, we love things to be either ors or black and whites. So I was talking about tactics before, but this also I think applies to a kind of a breakdown of thoughts on current Republicans and Trump supporters and that movement that coalesced over the last several decades. I mean, people might say 4 or 5 years, they might say 10 years with the Tea Party, but the reality is, I mean, it's been going on and kind of growing since like John Birch days of the 60s, right? But there's this kind of like predominant narrative that like Trump just ripped open a band-aid to like let people be as bad as they are, and like those people were already that bad and nothing can save them. I think that's true for a lot of them. I do. I also like know that it's not true for many of them.
yeah,
There are so many people that I like personally or just tangentially knew or just watched fall down these pipelines of radicalization
absolutely.
who they just didn't start in these places. But I think that the thing that people don't wind up realizing is that when you kind of isolate, these individuals wind up, I mean, and we all do this, but we wind up just getting confirmation bias over and over and over again. And it stops being a confirmation of whatever the original point was. They grow. And someone who is a pretty moderate person can wind up being like a violent white supremacist in a very short period of time if they really wind up believing that these people are their enemies or these people are causing them some type of harm or danger, or they might be causing their family or their neighbors harm or danger. And that's a really integral part of this, as those types of narratives. It's really hard for those things to develop if these people are having interactions that are calm and civil and bring connection about with the people that they are supposedly supposed to hate, whether it's ideologically or religiously or ethnically and racially. And like we've seen that like time and time again. There are like shitloads of studies that have like kind of just back that up. Like that's the best way to get people out of these types of like programmed thought and like hatred, is just to like get them interacting with other people, so that it just kind of breaks the spell, because a lot of it is kind of like that simple. There's just such a fear response going on in most of these people. And yeah, the best way to do that often is talking about fucking football or like whatever else you have in common with someone. The best weapon that like fascism and far right forces in this nation or anywhere else have, and what has always been their playbook, is to tell their adherents that they have nothing in common with their opponents.
Yep.
It is dehumanization. And people, I think, don't always realize that it starts that like even at that starting point of just saying like you have no commonality and no common interests and no common goals with someone is the beginning of dehumanization. Because I do think there's an intrinsic thing that all of us kind of back of head understand, that everyone, no matter like who they are, where they're from, we do have more or less a lot of the same aspirations and goals and desires, and they are really kind of hardwired human things. We really want connection, we really want love, we really want to be happy and have fun, and the different forms that takes. The dehumanization and the othering starts right there, and it's an incredibly dangerous thing to let people believe that in a society, because that really is the start down a path that is a much darker and more horrifying one.
Yeah, and like it's not just Trump. Like if you look internationally, you got Bolsonaro in Brazil, Viktor Orban's very similar playbook. The AfD in Germany, they it's divide and conquer. It is make someone out to be an enemy that is that you hate, just for being who they are. And I think that's like it's such a transparent grift that it's almost surprising that people like don't realize it, but also like I totally understand how people can get caught up into it. If I have, because a lot of people, and I don't know what the numbers are, but it's very easy to say like a lot of the people who ended up supporting Trump, who might have voted for Obama twice or what have you, like were those people probably going through economic problems? And then they were told things that, oh, well, the system doesn't like you, and this set of groups or whatever is the reason you're facing these economic problems, or Mexicans are the reason you don't have jobs, which has been like a terrible trope that's been like peddled for years and years by the right. Like it's considering all that, like it's easy for like me to say, like, oh well, I can't understand how someone got caught up into that, but then you think about, put yourself in their shoes, and maybe like again, it's hard to do, but like if you end up falling for it, it's hard to get out of, like you said. um yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah, man. All right, let's switch gears, man. We need to talk about something positive for once. Alex, and I know like we've got a little bit of still got a little bit of time. We'll just do a few more things here. So you're a busy guy, right? You're a very busy guy. You like I've seen you done comedy. Yeah, you seem like a busy guy. The perception is reality, my friend. But you've done comedy, you've done podcasting, organizing, the old Bull Moose Review, which I still like and follow on Facebook. And you've also been to a bunch of town hall meetings. Like, I guess my question is like, what has motivated you to kind of, like we talked specifically about the podcast, but what's motivated you to like, go to town hall meetings all the time and like organize and just all, like somehow just keep busy and do these different things. Like, what's kind of like motivated you to do this, and what's like molded you? I want to say like to kind of be the way you are, I guess.
Oh man, that's a
It's
great
a tough.
question.
It's whatever. It's the answer is whatever you want it to be.
I feel like that the answer changes every time someone asks me something like that, but probably to some degree, like what got me involved in politics, I guess, is really the base level of that question.
Yeah, sure, yeah.
Right?
Yeah,
and sure. I guess two things, right? Which is as anger and compassion. Like that, just that simply. Like I care really deeply for other people and for myself, honestly. But I hate seeing people suffer or hurt needlessly. I hate people not living the types of lives they should be able to in this time period. And that really fucking pisses me off that exists and where it exists. So I mean that was the basis of it, and it's been something that I've been involved with in one way or another since I was very young. Also, I mean, I think I started going out to events like against the Iraq war when I was like, I don't know, probably 13, 14, something
holy
like that.
Shit.
Yeah.
You were a kid.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, it's kind of always been some part of me forever.
Yeah, and I don't know if like you probably felt the same way at some point. Like and there's so many points where like I'm very much motivated by the same things. Like, I've always, like when I was young, I always noticed that, oh, there's problems, there's homelessness, there's racism, like all of these problems. Like, how the hell do we fix these? And like, me as a kid, I didn't know how to answer that. And then you realize as you're growing up, like the best way to fix it is to become involved with the political process, and
Yeah.
like whether that's legislatively as an activist, whatever. But it's almost like every like probably 6 months I go through this cycle of where I'm like 90% of the time I'm like gung ho. I feel very strongly in my convictions, and I'm going to do whatever it takes to bring about whatever change that I can. And then like every 6 months I go through the same thing of like I am done with politics. It's almost cyclical. It's so weird, but I just get to that point where I'm like, I'm done, never doing the podcast again, all that stuff. And then like I think a few weeks later I'm just like, all right, cool. Let's like then something. It's like that the Godfather Part 3. Every time I think I'm done, they pull me back in. I don't know if you've ever had those moments.
Yeah. Oh, constantly. And long ones too. Like year, 2 years at a time. Like burnout's a very real thing. You got to take care of yourself. And part of that is stepping away when you need to and understanding that that's okay. Like you're allowed to take a break because you just need to. Look, there's too many things that are fucked up and wrong in the world. It will just break you if you don't have other outlets or like other things that you can focus on. I guess like unless you're Ralph Nader, who just like I just feel like that's all. I don't think he's probably taken a vacation or a day off in his whole life. Yeah. He has that like whole quote about how he never got married because he like couldn't do the work he wanted to do if he like tried to have a family. I feel like there's the rare exception like that who's just like this is all I need.
Big shout out to Ralph Nader. Yeah.
But the rest of us, like our health requires us to like approach something just differently.
Yeah. Because I think like it's almost as if like the longer I've noticed this, the longer that I like don't have that kind of mental break, like the more jaded I become about politics. And then it's and here's the thing. I think there's like you said, there's a line with all this stuff, right? It's nothing's ever black and white. It is very nuanced, and sometimes being jaded or being critical or what have you can be a good thing because you can kind of see past the facade that politics many times is. But if you're just jaded about everything, then you're never going to accomplish anything because all you're going to be doing is complaining. So again, it's give and take. And I think that's like kind of been like the whole, I guess, if you're going to take anything away from this conversation, I think we've had, it's like that like eternal message. Like it's like everything's kind of nuanced, and to look at things black and white and to look at things like 1 and 2, A, B, whatever, it's not a proper, it's not a healthy way to think because life is a lot more complicated than that. You have to take into account other factors. I guess like last few questions, because I know we're like running on time or whatever, but and I just want to ask you this as an Arizonan. This is definitely the last negative, or might not be negative, depending on how you answer this. Thing I'll ask you: what do I guess you or progressives in Arizona make of Kirsten Sinema right now? Like considering where she,
I knew this one was coming.
Yeah, I have to ask. Like considering where she came from, like this was someone who was like a green. This is someone who was out there protesting for like universal childcare and immigration reform and other things like that. And now it seems like she's almost fighting against like all of the policies that she advocated for and kind of got her there. So like what's kind of like the sentiment right now?
Talking about Sinema is gonna make me smoke.
I love how the vape came out immediately as we're talking about this.
I think that Sinema is actually incredibly consistent in some ways. I think Sinema is who Sinema is. I think that the thing that Sinema, I think, historically has been best at from the time that she was an activist through being a, kind of I forget if she was a press person or a spokesperson or what her role was for Nader in Arizona, to, her unsuccessful runs for office, to her runs for office till now. She's really good at capturing attention for herself and building her name. A lot of her, I think, electoral strategy as she's come up the ladder has been really in just getting people to talk about her without her ever having to talk to anyone in a lot of ways. I mean, you can say that, she does fewer interviews now, she does fewer town halls now. All that is incredibly true. There's a downward slope, but it was not like any of these things were happening with frequency to begin with. It's almost as if her entire kind of press and messaging strategy really has been like to define herself by just letting other people constantly try to define her and kind of reacting to that. And look, it's been incredibly successful for her up to this point. But I think a lot of that means this kind of hodgepodge of votes and that don't make any sense. There's no linear path. It says one thing in one election cycle and then does another, when she's in office, and then a whole other thing is said during the next election cycle. How can someone go from being, whipping votes against SB 1070, or at least trying to like backing a Republican border bill, that like was gonna pass without any Democrats anyway. So like, what's the point in that? I mean, this has just been such a consistent thing with Kirsten Sinema her entire time in electoral office. This is just the first time that she's had like this big of a spotlight.
Yeah.
I think everyone has different theories for it, but I no one knows the calculus she's playing in her head other than herself. The one thing I think that it can be seen right now is that kind of whatever game she's playing to whatever end, and like historically like has, I think maybe worked well for her as an electoral strategy for some time. I think it's kind of run out of steam. She's at such a central point of this moment, and it's such a large stage right now that it's no longer, I think, a valid thing to like cause and engender criticism and derision for the sake of creating discussion, to create like name ID, to like get the next level up, which is, I really do believe that that's been kind of part of her whole shtick, for lack of a better term. That no longer, that doesn't work after being in the US Senate, because there's only one office like left to go to from that position, and that strategy and like those tactics do not get you from that office to the other one.
Yeah.
I don't even know, though, frankly, if they can keep her in this office. And I am personally against it. I don't want her in this office. I didn't want her, frankly, when she was first running for this office. I wish we had stronger primary challengers to her in her first run for the US Senate.
And yeah, sorry, go ahead.
No, I mean, that's just kind of all I have to say about it. Like, I think anyone who wants to like really concretely say like, why is she doing this, or what is she doing? Like, I have no idea. Maybe a couple people on her staff do. Maybe she does. Maybe no one does. Maybe she doesn't even know. But like, I mean, I don't have a real answer to give you. I have the things that I know from being someone who's been involved in Arizona politics and who's like watched her career unfold and watched a pattern of inconsistent behavior and inconsistency develop over time.
Yeah. And like the one big talking point that like, like CNN and a lot of people like to tout is that, oh, well, she's from Arizona and it's a Republican state. And like, she needs to become like, she needs to bring Republicans together and do everything bipartisanly in order to get like her constituents to vote for her next time. I'm like, dude, isn't Mark Kelly up for election next year and he's supporting like the same like thing, like the Build Back Better bill? It's just crazy to me the amount of excuses that are made, like, that kind of just don't hold water when you really look at it.
Well, so there's a part of this, right? Like, you look at Joe Manchin where he's at, it makes more sense.
Oh,
that
absolutely.
Can be true if you're in a real red state. And that has been the belief and estimation about Arizona for a long time, including by Democrats on the ground in Arizona. Despite the fact that, I mean, this is the thing that people love to say, right? Is that Sinema was the first, Democrat to win, the US Senate in 30 years in Arizona, which is more or less true, but that also ignores all the other statewide races that have been won in that time period, which includes the governorship and the Secretary of State and Attorney General, and just like the list kind of goes on. There's a lot of split ticket voting that goes on in this state. There just is. And this has never really, I believe, been a red state. I don't really truly, in my heart of hearts and all the time I've been here, really believe that. I think what this is that this is actually a place where a lot of those mythical independent voters do live. I think that also those mythical independent voters, the thing people misunderstand about them is that they are not necessarily moderates.
Yeah. I think that's very true. Yeah.
They are candidate driven more than anything. When you're talking about kind of true independence, too often what they are real populists. And in that sense, that doesn't mean that they're part of the populist right or the populist left. They're populists. They're looking for, their lives they're very angry often about their material conditions, and they're looking for someone who mirrors that anger. I think there's also something that a lot of folks are looking for here, including people who are hyper partisan in one way, where they're looking for certain types of charisma and swagger from their candidates. And I think when you look at the candidates who win here, it's really important to have strong candidates for this area. And sometimes that doesn't mean ideologically. Sometimes that means personality-wise. Does this person feel like an Arizonan? For better or worse, in a lot of ways, Kyrsten Sinema does feel like some stereotypes of some people in Arizona. And her general kind of fuck you, madcap attitude certainly, I think, embodies some attitudes here. So did John McCain, though. I think so did Joe Arpaio. So did Janet Napolitano. So did Bruce Babbitt. There are Mo Udall. So does, I think, currently Raul Grijalva. I think all of these people embody very Arizonan cultural identifiers and speak to some similar attitudes and personality traits that people here have, and I think resonate with and hold dear. Man, look, you want to know why Sinema won her election, though, and the couple of people right before her didn't? Is just go back and look at who they were. We ran statewide candidates like Rich Carmona, who seems like a nice enough guy, but he's, like watching paint dry on drywall, to listen to him talk. And he was in the Bush administration. That's our, whether he was a partisan actor in it or not, that was who we were running statewide as a Democrat here, a boring Bush guy, Yeah. Before that, we ran Rodney Glassman, who is just at this point, he's a perennial candidate and a recurring joke. You may have seen this. He's the guy who as part of his campaign, made a music video of himself off key singing Sweet Home Arizona to the tune of Sweet Home Alabama. So yeah, they weren't winners. They weren't going to win anything. Sinema, I don't think, had the keys, the magic formula on policy or ideology. I think that she was just remotely competent and felt like a person who grew up here. Her opponent was neither of those things.
Yeah, good old Martha.
And elections are often that simple.
Yeah, I agree. Last thing, and this is a very positive thing. If I'm going to Tucson, Arizona, I get off the plane, where's the first place I should go eat immediately?
Oh God. Oh man. Everywhere. I mean, this is a UNESCO.
No, see, this is the one. I'm not going to let you get away with the whole
I'm going to give you. The problem is, I could give you 30 answers. Is the problem to this? God, I don't know. You know what? I'll say this. I recommended yesterday, actually, in a stationery store while buying a birthday card for someone. I got asked this question by someone that was in the store, who's from out of town. Go somewhere to get a Sonoran hot dog. If you're just going to do the very first thing, like that's as stereotypical as it gets, and it's delicious, and you should. So like you can go to BK's is like my personal favorite, but I think El Gordo Canelo, if it's your first one and your first time in town, is like where you should start because it's what they're known for. It's like they've been on TV for them. You can get them shipped to you actually in other states now, I think. Start there. Okay. I mean, like El Gordo is like a fast food drive-through with a James Beard Award. If nothing else, go check it out for that reason.
Well, I'll absolutely do that, Alex. Alex Kack, thank you so much for joining the show. You got anything you want to plug or say or whatever?
Nothing at all.
Nothing.
Just have a happy Halloween, everybody.
Happy Halloween. Happy everything. Happy day today. But Alex, yeah, thanks for coming on the show, man. Hopefully we'll have you on again.
My pleasure. Thank you so much.
That was really an awesome conversation I had with Alex. Be sure to follow him on social media, check him out, and stay up to date with what he's doing. Also, be sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you get notified whenever a new episode is released. If you're watching on YouTube, if you tuned in through Spotify or Apple Podcasts, be sure to hit that follow button. And if you're on Apple Podcasts, please leave us a 5-star review. Let us know what you want to hear talked about on the show. Hit me up on Twitter at OmerQ Show. Also, feel free to hit us up on Facebook, Patreon, wherever, all the socials at OmerQ Show, OMERQ Show. Until next time.